What's going on, guys? This is Rob, and we are here with the fight between Superman and Absolute Black Adam, also known as King Shazam. Kind of a fun fact, King Shazam is what Billy Batson was named when he was corrupted by the Batman Who Laughs, so it's really just Jason Aaron carrying the name over here. Now, this opens up with a monologue from John Henry Irons, aka Steel, and we will talk about him here in a minute because he is a very important part of this story. But he says, "I had been thinking about this moment for years. Every time I would swing my hammer, imagining it was one man's skull I was smashing. His brains splattered on my shirt, his blood congealed on my boots. I imagined every possible way this night could go, planned meticulously for dozens of eventualities. 5 minutes in, and every plan I ever had has gone straight to hell." And so in the middle of all of this, Teth Adam starts to get angry. And the reason why was because he was just woken up with a father box. Now we'll talk about that here in a second, but he asked the question, how long was I left for dead? So he's appearing here for the first time in eons. Now Lois Lane has no clue who he is, and seemingly she doesn't even know about the legends of Teth Adam, because those have been circulating around for quite some time. And so when she asks, who is that? Superman asks, can you tell what language he's speaking? I hear elements of Hebrew and Arabic, and that's when John Henry Irons says it's Middle Egyptian, a language from 4,000 years ago. And Lois, in hearing this, is like, that's great. And who the hell are you? Because she doesn't know who John Henry Irons is either. And so that's when Roz, who's also here along with his daughter, watching all of this unfold, asks the question, what have we done? And that's when she just says, Father, why are we wasting our time on the Superboy when this magnificent specimen was already locked in the basement? And that's where Roz reveals the truth. He says, I believed Superman could be controlled, but there is no controlling King Shazam. And so in that moment, he starts lashing out, right? Asking the question, why is the world so damnably loud? What have you people done to it? Now, Superman immediately knows what's going on here, because the reality is that while King Shazam basically has the same powers as Superman, there is going to be a little bit of a caveat that we're going to find out here in a minute. But the reality was that at the time he ruled, the world was a vastly different place. There were no planes and trains and automobiles, none of that stuff, right? So it was very, very quiet place compared to what it is now. And it's kind of an interesting concept, because normally when you see something like this, it's like Superman's powers manifesting for the first time. But what happens when you take someone from a world drastically different from the one they're in now, where there were no automobiles and planes and all that kind of stuff, and then you suddenly thrust them in here? Of course it's going to be loud, it's going to be noisy compared to what they're used to. And so that's why Superman says, I understand what you're feeling. Believe me, you are confused, your senses overwhelmed. I can help you, I promise. You just need to calm down. And that is when John Henry Irons says Superman's mind and muscles operate at a speed far beyond the limits of what was long believed possible. And I am fairly certain he never even saw the punch of King Shazam, because seconds later, he's 1,100 miles away somewhere in Wyoming. That's how fast Black Adam is in the Absolute Universe, and how capable he is. Now, this is one of the coolest elements of the story, because up until this point, we've seen what Superman is capable of, and we've seen him perform some pretty incredible strengths, but I would go so far as to argue it's a more toned down version of Superman compared to what we're traditionally used to. Now, a lot of this is just because of the history of Superman in DC Comics, right? The Silver Age at one point was pulling a chain of planets outside of a dying galaxy, and I think an old Superboy comic. So we've seen his powers fluctuate drastically over the years, but even in more recent years, he doesn't seem nearly as capable as the version of Black Adam that we're seeing. Now, it's also the observation of John Henry Irons, so it's not the most reliable source on what Superman actually saw. It could simply just be that Superman was hit with his guard down, but that takes us into John Henry Irons himself. Right, here's the cool thing. So what it does is it actually opens up months ago, before all of this goes down, and we get this moment where John Henry Irons is working on a piece of machinery in a slaughterhouse, and he's told, Irons, we need you on the floor. And he says, I'm supposed to be clocking out. I've been here since 5 o'clock. And he's told, do you want this job or don't you? I thought your mom was sick or something. And that's when he kind of muses to himself, right? Remind him of the Fair Labor Standards Act, threaten to go to OSHA with all this. And he just says, I'm coming, right? Because the reality here is that in this kind of a condition, who's going to listen to him? right? The reality of this world is that there are some jobs where you just don't get anybody paying attention to the crap you have to go through. You just grin and bear it, or you quit. That's it. It sucks, but it is the nature of the world. And that's where he says, stunners are down. The whole line's backed up. And John just says, I'll get him fixed. And this guy says, no, we don't have time for that, right? The killing floor has to get back to killing pronto. And so he says, I need you to handle this one the old-fashioned way, muscle and steel. And so John Henry Irons says, when I was 14 years old, I built a helmet in my parents' garage that fired an ultrasonic stun beam to safely pacify assailants. I called it the Peacemaker. Not long after, men came from Lazarus Corp, signed me to a contract they said would be worth millions. 5 years later, I make $7.25 an hour at the Muskogee, Oklahoma Meat Processing Center, fixing their run-down machinery, and sometimes manning the knockbox. My name is John Henry Irons, and I am the American dream. Now, let's talk about this for a second, because there's big differences between John Henry Irons as we see him here and as we're used to seeing him in DC Comics. And I bring this up because the stories are very similar, but I think he's also going to go on to have a very significant role within the Superman mythos, because something to notice here, he's the first real superpowered ally that Superman has. Hawkman is still a little ambiguous. We don't necessarily know if he's an ally or not. He really just arrived more with words of warning, as opposed to I am here to help. So when it comes to John Henry Irons in DC Comics, as most people know, he appeared in the aftermath of the death of Superman. He was one of the 4 Supermen who rose to prominence in the reign of the Superman story. You had cyborg Superman Hank Henshaw, who had technically been around beforehand, but Hank Henshaw basically came back as a cyborg version of Superman. You had Superboy Connor Kent, who was created by Lex. You had the Eradicator, and then you had John Henry Irons. Now, of all the different iterations of Superman who existed out there, John Henry Irons was really the only guy who didn't really have powers. And while his origin wasn't explored in a meaningful way initially, we end up finding it out later on in Steel Volume 2, issue number 0. The reason why it's called Steel Volume 2 is because there was a character named Steel beforehand. I think his name was Hank Haywood, but I'm not going to swear by that. Now, the way this played out back in issue number 0 is we end up finding out that when John Henry Irons was a very young kid, his parents were killed. It looked more like a hit as opposed to just some kind of burglary that had gone wrong. The cops chalked it up to that, right? Just some burglary that went sideways and his parents died. But the reason why his life ended up going on the path that it did is because as he was being escorted by one of the cops, they made a comment in saying, the only way to really keep your family safe is to become so rich and powerful that no one can touch you. And so because of his athleticism, he ended up getting a baseball scholarship to Yale, where he developed an incredible aptitude towards engineering, specifically focusing on ballistics. And so what ends up happening is he gets a job working for Amertech. Now, Amertech was an arms manufacturing company, which was ran by a guy by the name of Thomas Weston. And John Henry Irons' job was to essentially design weapons. What ends up happening is a weapon that he designed called BG-60 was being used by Thomas Weston on Kurdish rebels. Now, when John Henry Irons learns about this, he gets pissed off, not because of the fact that his weapons are being used. I mean, they're weapons. That's what they exist for, to inflict death and destruction. It's the fact that innocent people were being caught in the crossfire, men, women, and children. And so when John learns about this, he ends up going back, wiping out all information about an updated prototype he had been designing. He takes off to Metropolis and then changes his name. Now, this kind of leads into the whole story arc with Thomas Weston and John Henry Irons, where you end up learning that what Thomas Weston does is he gets involved as an illegal arms dealer with a character by the name of Angora Lapin, also known as White Rabbit. By issue number 6, Thomas Weston, I believe, is arrested for his crimes once it's all exposed by John Henry Irons, but the relationship between Steel and Superman comes into play leading up to the death of Superman. That what ends up happening is that John Henry Irons, having changed his name and working as a construction worker in Metropolis, is on the job site one day when one of his co-workers, a guy by the name of Pete, who, as John Henry Irons described, had been working long shifts overtime and was just exhausted, ends up falling off the building. And so John Henry Irons goes to rescue him, but in that moment, the hook that he has comes loose. And so he starts to fall, and Superman rescues him. And so he tells Superman, right, like, you saved my life, and then Superman says, then do something with it. And that's when John Henry Irons decides to become some kind of a superhero. It's not immediate. He's kind of mulling over what kind of person he wants to become. What ends up happening, though, though, is that during the fight between Superman and Doomsday, that the building collapses while Irons is grabbing his sledgehammer with the intention of going out to help. Once he gets out of the building, Superman's dead. And so that's when he decides to build a new suit of armor for himself, call himself Steel, and go out and carry on the legacy of Superman. So he's a tried and true good guy. Now, this is the pre-New 52 origin, and honestly, I think it's the most beloved origin when it comes to Steel. But I simply bring all that up to say that the origin that we're getting here is very, very different. It's not nearly as complex, and I imagine in due time we'll probably get a more in-depth origin for his character, or we might not. We don't really know what direction Jason Aaron's going to go in. He might kill Steel, within the next issue or two. Hopefully not. But there are elements of it that do remain the same, right? Betrayal by the person that he's working for. In the main DC universe, it was Thomas Weston. Here, it's just a guy who treats him like crap and takes advantage of the situation that he's in. A lot of these themes remain the same, despite the fact that the context around it has changed. And so once Superman is dealt with, right, all the way in Wyoming, 1,100 miles away, Black Adam starts to address Steel, Lois, Ra's al Ghul, and his daughter. And he asks, where am I? What pretender has seized the throne of the Pharaoh? What have you done to the world I was poised to save? And Ra's just says, Talia, give me the father box, then leave this place at once, and know that I loved you the best that I could. But Talia doesn't really understand the gravity of the situation that she's in. Right? She says, a touching sentiment, father, but you seem to be forgetting someone. And that's when he realizes Steel is over there. But even he doesn't know who Steel is. Right? And that's when he just says, I have no idea who you are or how I might have wronged you, though I would imagine I deserve your wrath. But either way, we do not have time for this right now. And so Steel just says, do it, right? Remember her screams. Now it's his turn. And so he goes to attack. So whatever it was that was going on behind the scenes, it was John Henry Irons basically losing presumably the person closest to him, likely his wife, at the hands of Ra's al Ghul. Now again, this makes perfect sense, right? Whether it was his wife, it could also be his daughter, because we know he has a daughter in the DC universe. Whatever that is, because of the machinations of Ra's al Ghul before his ultimate defeat at the hands of Superman, and then Superman essentially turning him into a good guy, or at least a guy who is trying to make up for his past misdeeds, which is the version that you see here, he did something to Steel, destroyed his life in some capacity. And so in the midst of all of this, right, Black Adam just screams, you, right, and looks directly at Ra's and says, that box belonged to the wizard's Brainiac. Where are they? Where are those who made me, who betrayed me? Now, this is an important thing to keep in mind here, because it's the difference between Black Adam as we see him here and Black Adam as we see him in the main DC universe. A lot of you guys probably already know, Black Adam in the main DC universe got his power from the wizard Shazam, literally an old dude who sits on the Rock of Eternity. That's a very generalized, hand-wavy explanation of him, but at the end of the day, that's really what he is, incredibly powerful, but he bestowed that power on Black Adam. In the Absolute Universe, that's not the case, right? One of the things to remember that we saw in the last video that we did, which I'll post a link to the playlist because we're not gonna go as in-depth here, was that Teth Adam, alongside his people, had been taken from their homeland and turned into slaves. And then the Phantom Stranger appeared to them and said, do not be so afraid. At some point in the future, a person is going to arrive that's going to liberate the world and bring a lasting peace. Seemingly, she was talking about Superman. Superman's 4,000 years later, and the reality was that the slaves needed to be freed now. And so Teth Adam, in hearing all of this, had also heard tale of a wizard in the desert. And so he ends up going out there to visit, only to find out that the wizard in the desert is a ruse. It's the Wizard of Oz, right? Pay no attention to the man behind the curtain. That what ended up happening is that these Brainiacs that were out there had been luring people in with this false myth and this false legend for the purpose of just experimenting on them as some kind of a sadistic game. There is a fan theory circulating around out there right now that all the different Brainiacs that we've seen over the course of the Absolute Universe have been people that the Brainiacs have experimented on. As far as I'm aware, we don't have any information to confirm that, but it could have simply just been something that I missed. What's important here is that what the Brainiacs did is they took a father box, which is traditionally apocalyptic technology. So essentially they were drawing on the power of Darkseid. They ended up finding the Father Box in a black hole. We still don't quite know how it got there, but they used it to give Teth Adam the powers that he has now. Now, it's important to know that in issue number 18, the story stopped when he was taken by Brainiacs and given power. So we don't know what that process looked like, and we don't quite know how it all went down. I'm sure we'll find out as time goes on. But the whole motivation for Teth Adam in the first place was to become the person who was going to liberate the world. So effectively the person the Phantom Stranger was talking about, beating Superman to the punch to a degree. And that's what he's talking about here, because in the midst of all of this, right, when he starts asking questions like, who betrayed me, that Ra's al Ghul steps forward and identifies himself and says, I am the Lord of this house. It was under my orders that you were kept here. If you should be angry with anyone, Teth Adam, it is me. Please let my daughter go. Now, this points to the idea that Ra's al Ghul knew who Teth was and knows enough about the mythos and the legends to know it was safer not to let him out. That if he did, Teth Adam would go on a rampage because, again, he's an uncontrollable figure. And so Teth looks at Ra's and says, if you know who I am, then you know what I have lost. And Ra's tells him, I know you were a slave who rose to be pharaoh of all of Egypt. And Teth just says, of all the world, until it was stolen from me. And so Ra's says, some things have not changed. Since your time, your majesty, Brainiacs are still not to be trusted. And so Teth asks, how many years has it been? How long was I asleep? And Ra's gives him the truth. He says, as recorded in the secret histories of the Hall of Justice, it is said that Teth Adam reigned as pharaoh of the Black Land for all of 8 days, more than 3,000 years ago. Now, that statement, the secret histories of the Hall of Justice, that's likely going to lead to a Secret Origins line of comics for the Absolute Universe. Those of you guys who don't know what Secret Origins are, it's a very old line of comics. It's been around for decades. It's exactly what it sounds like. It's basically origin stories for characters in the Absolute Universe. Yes, we will cover them if they ever come out. But again, Teth Adam, in hearing this, is kind of flabbergasted, right? 3,000 years. And so Ra's tells him, before you do anything, I beg you, hear my words. Those who imprisoned you passed from the earth millennia ago, but the world remains under a call of darkness. I know, for I myself long labored to keep it there. I was a keeper of the darkness. I was the absolute power, corrupted absolutely. I was one of the most irredeemable men who have ever lived, but only recently I have come to know regret for all I ever was. That means there is hope for this world, for those who are lost. That hope has a name, but Black Adam won't listen to him. As they're having this conversation, he basically cuts him off, and Black Adam just says, the wizards that night in the desert, they granted my wish. They gave me many gifts, including the wisdom of King Solomon. That means I know lies when I hear them, and immediately seizes Ra's al Ghul. Now again, it's almost kind of crazy the way he looks here, because in a lot of ways, he's the antithesis of Superman. Superman has his red dust cape, right? And the red dust cape is able to do a variety of things. This whole cloak, the form and function of Black Adam, is very similar, but when he seizes Ra's al Ghul, Ra's says, wait, I speak the truth, but Black Adam won't hear it and kills him on the spot, literally tears him into pieces. And so in that moment, everyone's just watching. And in that moment, Superman loses it, with the whole thing being broadcast around the world. He says, do you think I didn't really want to kill that man for what he'd done? I did everything I could to save him, and you just killed him mercilessly, right, with no real regret. And so when Superman goes to attack Black Adam, or at least confront him, Black Adam asks, what in the name of the gods are you supposed to be? But then he recollects the prophecy of the Phantom Stranger. Eyes of fire, strength beyond imagining, walks among the clouds with the dust of his home upon his back. And so at that point he says, little child, who made you in my image? And he says, a cheap copy, nothing more. Now, that's the irony of the situation. Whether it's because of the fact that Black Adam has become so caught up in what he believes himself to be that he's lost any real meaningful hold on reality, or because he truly believed the prophecy was speaking about him, he sees Superman as a clone. Now, we know from the prophecy of the Phantom Stranger, she was most likely talking about Superman, but it's also possible she wasn't. right? The form and function that Black Adam took on almost falls perfectly in line with what the Phantom Stranger said. The other part of this is we don't know that the Phantom Stranger is a good guy, right? So these are a couple things to keep in mind in relation to the absolute universe. It's very similar to Earth 3. Those that we would traditionally believe to be good guys are bad guys, and those we traditionally believe to be bad guys are good guys. It's not universal, right? Superman's a hero. He's not a villain. He's not Ultraman. But the fact is, there's a lot of topsy-turviness going on in this reality. And so in watching all of this, John Henry Irons just asks, what the hell just happened? And he just thinks to himself, right? Like, we have to get out of here as fast as we can. Talia al Ghul picks up the head of her father and just says, damn you, right? How dare you? How dare you leave me alone in this place? I promise I will burn it all in your blessed name. And so that's where Superman takes a momentary reprieve from the conflict, goes back to Lois and says, please don't remove the watch again. Its crystals will tend to your wound. Emergency personnel are on the way because the watch he gave her is built out of Kryptonian technology. And he says, here's your gun back. And so as she starts to walk away, Talia starts to hassle her, right? Stings, doesn't? Disappointing, your precious alien. Face it, Lane, we are both our father's children. But at the end of the day, she just says, shut up, Talia, and just walks away because she's not really interested in hearing any of that. But then Superman is back on in the attack with Black Adam, and he addresses it directly. Teth Adam, I come not to fight. And Teth just asks, right, you speak my language. And Superman says, a little bit, yes, right? I don't really know how to say, I just read a bunch of books at super speed. I'm sorry for what happened to you. I know this must be difficult, but the man you killed, such a thing is against the law in this time. And that's where Teth responds and says, really, then why do I hear so much screaming, so much wailing and gnashing of teeth from all across this brave new world of yours? Perhaps killing is only wrong when it's men like me who do it. And Superman says that's not true, but the response of Teth is, isn't it? I think the way of the world has not changed much after all. Now, Teth Adam does have a point insofar as the world in the absolute universe is a very violent place, but it's not really accurate to put that on the shoulders of Superman and to say you are a part of it, therefore you support it, because Superman just got here, right? He literally just arrived here not too long ago. And in fact, he is making a concerted effort to basically cast that world off. But from Teth Adam's perspective, he's part and parcel to it. And so he is as guilty as everybody else. And that's what's interesting is because he says, during my reign, it took 2 days for me to free every slave in Egypt. On the 3rd day, I ended all war. Given time, I would have made a paradise of the entire world. Instead, those who would not see change locked me away, and apparently in my stead, they made you. Now again, there's a lot of this that we don't know about. There's a vast difference between Teth Adam liberating people peacefully and bringing a peace to the world, and Teth Adam just making himself a dictator of the world and destroying those who enslaved his people and forcing everyone to live under his tyrannical rule. These are not the same. And just because you're the star of your story does not mean that you are the hero of your story. And so that's a really interesting thing to keep in mind when it comes to how he's portraying all of this. It's from his perspective, and whoever wants to believe they're the bad guy in their own story. And so at that point, Superman says, I assure you, King Shazam, I am a copy of no man. Please, I do not want anyone else to get hurt. But he cuts him off, right, and says, I think I was awakened by mistake, and that man that my sand cloak tore asunder, he was one of the world's rulers, the elite, the untouchable. So for my crimes, I'm to be reburied, forgotten all over again. And the response to Superman, you have my word, I will not allow that to happen. But Teth Adam doesn't want to hear any of it. 3,000 years, he says, and still the lords of the land cannot abide a free slave who can fly. And so Superman just says, please stop, right? Don't do this. And Teth just tells him, so tell me, slave of this new world, what masters hold your chains? And so John Henry Irons, Steel, and watching all of this says, the punches fly like lightning, one every millisecond, fists crackling with 1 billion joules of power. Because at this point, they're fighting over the city, and it's almost difficult to figure out where one ends and the other begins, because their cloaks are intertwining with one another. It's literally like a tornado of energy between absolute Superman and absolute Black Adam. But Steel lunges into the fight nonetheless. He says air around them heated to hotter than the surface of the sun, and I am just a guy in a suit with a hammer that I am still half afraid might explode. I thought that I came here to kill a man, and instead, I fight to save one. Because in this moment, between Superman and Black Adam, that what Steel does is he cracks Black Adam across the face and sends him flying. And he says, after that, everything becomes a blur. We blow out every window for 10 square blocks in Metropolis. Superman vomits blood across 2 continents. I get burst eardrums and a concussion somewhere over Brazil, or maybe it was Siberia. The thunder shakes the pillars of the world. A new age has begun. And as they pass through Gotham City, Batman's watching, and it says, so begins the reign of the Superman. And this is a very important statement. This is really Jason Aaron giving us a statement about what comes next. Because up until this point in time, it has been absolute Superman facing off against what are basically corrupt institutions and people with really advanced weaponry. This is the first time he's facing off against his equal, someone who rivals him in power. Metahuman versus metahuman. Now, again, others exist out there, Wonder Woman and Absolute Martian Manhunter and so on, but that's the meaning, the reign of the Superman, the idea that this ushers in the fact that the threats will become greater and greater, more and more significant, and the fights themselves will become more and more dangerous, which means trying to minimize collateral damage will become more and more difficult. It's a precipice. It's one of these things where the world can and may turn against Superman. And so when Black Adam finally subdues Superman, doesn't really kill him, doesn't really knock him out, Superman's just kind of laying there on the water, that Black Adam says, I fulfilled the prophecy. Pretenders to my throne must die. And he starts pummeling Superman, right? And says, I have come to break the chains that bind the world, and this time I will not be so gentle about it. And so Steel is right there alongside them, and the whole time, Black Adam is beating Superman within an inch of his life. Superman's doing what he can. Don't misunderstand, right? The guy's on a ragdoll, sitting there just getting his face lit up, right? Getting his eyes dotted in every conceivable way. He's firing off heat vision, but at the end of the day, he doesn't really seem to be a match for Black Adam. And so while Steel is watching all of this, Hawkman shows up and says, you look like you should stay down, friend. And Steel just says, not a damn chance. And so Hawkman, in seeing all of this, says, yeah, well, what do I know, right? Nobody ever listens to me anyway. I've only been doing this for 80 years. So tell me something, kid. Is it just me, or has this superhero thing gotten kind of out of hand? Because what it does is it creates a momentary reprieve. For a brief moment, everyone stops fighting. With that being said, guys, we're gonna bring this video to an end. I am in it. Like, I am invested in this. I love Absolute Superman so far. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, drop a like. Thank you all for watching, and I will catch you all later. Peace.